Hello everyone, a very good evening and welcome to Byju's Exam Prep. Welcome to our weekly current affairs webinar. So today we have 8 important topics lined up for our discussion. But before we start, let me remind you that our prelims test series has started. I'm sure most of you would be aware of this. The prelims test series for 2023 has started from the 6th of November. So without fail, take up these tests very seriously as it will help you gear up and prepare for the upcoming prelims. These tests are available both in English and Hindi. It's available both in the online and offline format. We have 36 tests lined up, which includes both full-length tests and as well as sectional tests. So prepare well and take up the practice test very, very seriously because this is the stepping stone for you to crack the upcoming prelims. So with this, let's start with our weekly current affairs webinar. First, I would like to show you the topics that we are going to cover today. We have 8 important topics lined up from across subjects. We have topics from polity, environment ecology, science and technology, and also a topic from economy. These were topics which were in news over the last 1 week. These are very, very important developments, especially from a prelims point of view. Of course, these topics shall be relevant for your mains as well, but predominantly these topics are more relevant for your prelims. So without wasting any time, let's start with the first topic, which is from polity. Last week, the Supreme Court passed a landmark judgment. A 5-judge constitutional bench of the Supreme Court has upheld the constitutional validity of the 10% reservation that was introduced for EWS category or economically weaker sections. So this landmark ruling marks a major development with regard to the policy of reservation in India. So in this context, we have to talk about the 103rd Constitutional Amendment Act, which had introduced the 10% reservation for EWS category back in 2019. This constitutional amendment had been challenged on several grounds. The Supreme Court was looking into this case from many months, and finally a 5-judge constitutional bench has passed a landmark verdict which has upheld the constitutional validity of this reservation. See, the 10% reservation for the economically weaker sections was introduced by the 103rd Constitutional Amendment Act. This in itself is an important fact for your prelims. You should know what the 103rd Constitutional Amendment Act dealt with. It introduced 10% reservation for economically weaker sections. This would apply for the economically weaker sections in our society, particularly from the general category, that is the non-SC/ST, non-OBC category. Because the SCs, STs, OBC communities, they already had affirmative action or reservation under the Indian Constitution. So the non-OBC, non-SC/ST categories, that is essentially the general category, and those who are economically weaker, those who fall below a economic criteria, they would be eligible for this 10% reservation in education and as well as in government jobs. It would apply for admissions to educational institutions and also for entry to government jobs. So this important constitutional amendment was introduced back in 2019. It was passed by the parliament and it had been approved by the President of India as well. So as soon as this reservation was introduced, it triggered a major controversy because the very topic of reservation has always been controversial in India, especially since OBC reservation was introduced following the Mandal politics of 1980s, 1990s. Since then, the topic of reservation has been politically very, very controversial because there are chances that policies like reservation policy could be easily misused by vested interests. It could be misused by political parties for electoral reasons. Because when the policy of reservation is misused, it can become a populist measure as a tool to win votes, to create vote banks, instead of truly serving the socio-economic purpose. So it's in this context that you need to understand why should we have a policy of reservation? What did the 103rd Amendment Act deal with? So these concepts have to be very, very clear, because there can be a static question in prelims, a question which is related to the topic of reservation. If you look at Article 14 of the Indian Constitution, it deals with right to equality. I'm sure those who have covered the basics of polity would be aware of this. So the next article, that is Article 15, it mandates the state to not discriminate against its citizens on the grounds of religion, caste, sex, place of birth, etc. Article 16, which is also part of right to equality, mandates the state to provide for equal opportunities in public employment. With regard to public employment, the state has been mandated under Article 16 to create equal opportunities for all. And under Article 15, the state has been prohibited from discriminating against its citizens. The state cannot discriminate on the lines of religion or caste or sex, place of birth, race, etc. The very same articles, that is Article 15 and 16, they do contain a few exceptions. Even though it is mandating the state to treat everyone equally and create equal opportunities in public employment, it does provide for few exceptions, which we refer to as the reasonable restrictions that are provided in our Constitution. Because the fundamental rights guaranteed by the Constitution, they are not absolute. The fundamental rights, they do come with reasonable restrictions. So under Article 15 and 16, the state has been empowered to discriminate on certain grounds. The state has the powers to discriminate on certain grounds, especially to provide for the welfare of those classes which are socially and educationally backward. Those sections of our society which are socially, educationally backward, they could be provided special provisions by the state under Article 15 Clause 4 and Article 16 Clause 4. This is what we call as the policy of affirmative action. Since few sections of our society have been discriminated and oppressed for centuries together because of our oppressive caste system, the lower castes, the scheduled castes, the Dalits, the scheduled tribes, and few other backward classes, they have been at the receiving end of this social discrimination. This centuries of oppression and social discrimination has made many sections of the Indian society educationally backward. So to account for these historical wrongs that were committed, the founding fathers of India who drafted the Indian Constitution, they envisioned the policy of affirmative action, which is basically reservation or the quota system, so that the state will have the power to make exceptions on the grounds of social and educational backwardness. So this allows the state to identify those communities which are socially, educationally backward and then provide for reservation to them with regard to education and public employment. This is one way of uplifting these communities and making them move up the social ladder. So initially, the reservation that was introduced was applicable just for the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes, for the SCs and STs. Even this reservation came with a time period. It applies for 10 years from the Constitution, from when the Constitution came into force, and it has to be renewed for the reservation policy to continue. So since independence, reservation for SCs and STs has been continued with a periodic renewal at every 10 years interval. Then later, following the recommendations of the Mandal Commission, OBC reservation was also introduced because the Constitution allows the state to provide for affirmative action for backward classes. Other backward classes could also be considered, and if the state has evidence to show that certain sections of the society are socially, educationally backward, even they can be provided with reservation. So since the Mandal Commission's report was accepted and OBC reservation was introduced, it became a political controversy as it led to a social divide between various castes and communities. This became a politically controversial topic, and since then the reservation policy has been continued with few restrictions being placed with the Supreme Court. Following the controversy of the Mandal politics, the Supreme Court had ruled that reservation provided by the state cannot cross 50%. And this landmark judgment was delivered in the Indira Savni case. In the landmark Indira Savni judgment, the Supreme Court placed a cap on reservation, that total reservation cannot cross 50% of the total seats that are available. This was to ensure that there is a fair opportunity available for those who belong to the general category as well. So this had been the policy of reservation in India. But in 2019, the government tabled and it got a bill enacted that provided for the 103rd Constitutional Amendment Act. This introduced two new clauses to Article 15 and 16, that is 15 Clause 6 and 16 Clause 6. Two new clauses were added to Article 15 and 16 that allowed the government to provide for reservation to a new class, to a new category, that is economically backward sections or economically weaker sections, which we abbreviate as EWS. So this bill was approved by the Parliament, received the President's assent, and became the 103rd Amendment Act. So since then, the central government and states, they have extended EWS reservation in education and as well as in employment. States could also bring out their own policies based on this and introduce reservation, 10% reservation for the EWS category. Here the idea was to promote the welfare of economically weaker sections which haven't benefited from the policy of reservation. Since reservation was earlier restricted only to SCs, STs and OBCs who are socially, educationally backward, the economic criteria had never been considered. Particularly within the general category, those who are economically weaker, those who belong to the lower sections of the society, those who are poor, extremely poor, they had never benefited from the policy of reservation. Even within those communities which were enjoying reservation like SCs, STs and OBCs, reservation was largely being cornered by vested interests who were already economically and politically influential. So to address this, the Supreme Court had introduced the concept of creamy layer so that those who are undeserving of reservation can be excluded from the affirmative action policy. But when EWS quota was introduced, it triggered a major protest from the political opposition, from various sections of the Indian society, as it would not only breach the 50% cap that was placed with the Supreme Court, but this reservation, this new reservation which was introduced, it would be applicable only for the general category, only for the poor within the general category. It wouldn't apply for SCs, STs or OBCs who are also poor. So this triggered a controversy in India and it led to a legal challenge at the Supreme Court. So the government immediately implemented this policy of reservation and it laid out a eligibility criteria to decide as to who would be eligible for this reservation. To decide upon the 10% EWS quota, obviously a threshold had to be identified, an income threshold and an asset threshold had to be identified so that only the genuine population could draw the benefits of this reservation. So according to this eligibility criteria, any family with an income of less than 8 lakh rupees would become eligible for the 10% EWS quota. And those who possessed assets lesser than what is mentioned here, those who owned lesser than 5 acres of agricultural land, those who are not beneficiaries of any existing policies of reservation, that is SCs, STs, and OBCs. Those who have a house below 1,000 square feet or a plot of 100 yards. Those who own a residential plot or a site of less than 200 yards in a non-notified municipal area. So those who fall under this definition, those who fall under this threshold, only they would be eligible for the 10% EWS quota. So those who own agricultural land above 5 acres, they would be left out. They wouldn't be eligible because they are not economically weaker. Families with income of more than 8 lakh rupees, they would be excluded because according to the government, they are not economically weaker sections. So this criteria was brought out by the center, and based on this, the center implemented the 10% reservation for the economically weaker sections. But this policy, the 103rd Constitutional Amendment Act, and as well as the eligibility criteria, both were challenged. Both were challenged at the Supreme Court by those who were opposed to this reservation. Various activists, the political opposition who are opposed to this reservation brought up a petition at the Supreme Court challenging the 10% EWS quota that was introduced. The criticism against this reservation has mainly been on the account of 3 reasons. The first point raised by the opponents of this policy is that 10% reservation for EWS category will breach the 50% cap that had been laid down by the Supreme Court in 1992 in the landmark Indrasamy judgment. Right? The Supreme Court, after the Mandal reservation was introduced for OBS category, had made it very clear that reservation cannot exceed 50%. And this was seen as a benchmark that was laid out by the Supreme Court. So according to the critics of the EWS quota, the additional 10% which was being given, it was over and above the 50% which already exists. So it would breach the 50% limit, and hence they said that this reservation is constitutionally invalid. It was argued that this reservation is unconstitutional, and they requested the Supreme Court to take a look and carry out a judicial review to check the constitutional validity of the reservation policy that had been introduced. It has also been alleged that the eligibility criteria has been selected arbitrarily by the government. The question is, on what basis has the government chosen 8 lakh rupees as a minimum threshold? Is there any empirical evidence to indicate that those who are earning below 8 lakhs, only they fall under economically weaker sections? If there is no rationale for it, if there is no scientific basis for it, then on what grounds has the government chosen this as the eligibility criteria? You also saw the assets that were mentioned, the minimum assets. On what basis has the government chosen this? This was the question that was brought up in front of the Supreme Court. If this criteria is arbitrary, then a large section of the society won't be eligible for the 10% EWS quota, and thereby making it unconstitutional again. So on this ground as well, the 10% quota was challenged. And finally, it was argued by the opponents that this policy violates the basic structure of the Constitution itself. The basic structure doctrine, which was laid down by the Supreme Court in the Keshwanand Bharti case. In this case, the Supreme Court had made it clear that any constitutional amendment, it cannot seek to change the very basic structure or the very basic tenets of the Constitution. The basic features of the Constitution cannot be altered through any constitutional amendment. So critics of this quota, they pointed out that by providing reservation only for the general category, the government is discriminating against the other communities, that is SCs, STs, and OBCs. So this is a case of treating those who are unequals as equals. This is what the critics argued. Those who challenged the reservation, they argued that SCs, STs, OBCs, they face inequality in the society even today. They are unequals, which has been accepted by the court as well. Compared to the general category, they are unequals. Then, if the government is treating them as equals through this policy and providing reservation only to the general category by excluding the rest, then this would violate the basic structure of the constitution itself. Because the constitution says, that is Article 15, that the state cannot discriminate on the lines of caste. Right? So on these grounds, the petitioners had challenged the constitutional validity of this law, but the government has consistently defended this provision. The Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment had argued that under Article 46 of the Directive Principles, under Article 46 of DPSP, the state has been given a target, a goal, to ensure that the interests of economically weaker sections is protected. So the ministry's argument is that through the powers vested under Article 46, even though it is non-justiciable, the government has a duty, the state has a duty to uplift the economically weaker sections. Because Article 46 says the state shall promote with special care the educational and economic interests of the weaker sections. This applies not just for SCs, STs and other communities, it will apply even for the general category who would be facing some form of social injustice or exploitation. Poverty is a form of social injustice, irrespective of which caste you belong to. So government's argument was that this is a fair policy. It's a constitutionally valid policy because the constitution itself is mandating the state under Article 46 to uplift the economically weaker sections, to correct the social injustice which has been done to any section of the society. And the government said the poor people who fall under this income criteria, they are well deserving of this reservation. So it was based on this argument that the case was fought at the Supreme Court over the last many months. It was a high-profile case. The Supreme Court did question the eligibility criteria. A few months back, the Supreme Court did question the government on what basis have you chosen this eligibility criteria. The Supreme Court asked the government to show is there any empirical data, any rational or any scientific basis for choosing this arbitrary criteria, which is 8 lakh rupees, these assets that were mentioned. On what basis have you chosen this as a criteria? So Supreme Court raised this question to the government, and this pushed the government to constitute a committee to review the criteria which had been laid out. This government-appointed committee observed that the 8 lakh income criteria is valid. The committee said, based on its studies, it has established that 8 lakhs income criteria is a valid criteria because those who fall below the 8 lakh income criteria, they fall under the economically weaker section category. This was upheld by the committee and it was accepted by the government as well. However, the committee did not agree with few other criteria related to the assets that were mentioned by the government. With regard to the property assets, the immovable property assets that was laid down as a criteria, the committee didn't agree with it. So the government is considering to renew and update the criteria, but however, the income criteria was accepted by the committee. It was supported by the committee and the government accepted this recommendation. So last week, the Supreme Court has delivered its final judgment, and a 5-judge constitutional bench, after carefully examining all the arguments, has passed a 3:2 judgment. It means majority of the judges, that is 3 judges out of this 5-judge constitution bench, have agreed that this reservation is constitutionally valid. So majority judgment went in favor of the government, and the Supreme Court has basically upheld the constitutional validity of the 103rd Constitutional Amendment Act. While passing this judgment, the Supreme Court observed that the economic criteria does not violate the basic structure of the Constitution. The 3 judges who agreed with the government's argument and who have upheld the constitutional validity, they agreed that the exclusion of classes covered under Article 15, Clause 4 and 16, Clause 4, that is, the exclusion of OBCs, SCs and STs from the EWS category, does not affect the basic structure of the Constitution. Because according to the majority judgment, this is not a case of treating unequals equally. The majority of the judges have agreed that SCs, STs, OBCs, they already have their set of reservation. By providing exclusive reservation for economically weaker sections within the general category, the government has not violated the basic structure, because this is not a case of treating unequals as equal. Right? Here, taking up economically weaker sections as a focus area is a reasonable classification according to the majority of the judges who have upheld the validity of this law. They have pointed out that this reservation which has been provided, even though it breaches the ceiling limit, it still does not violate the basic structure, because the cap laid down by the Supreme Court in the Indira Savni case, it is not rigid. The Supreme Court has pointed out that the 50% ceiling or the 50% cap on reservation is not inflexible, meaning it is subject to change. If the government brings out reservation on valid grounds, if it is justified, if it is not treating unequals as equals and breaking the basic structure of the Constitution, then such a reservation can breach the 50% cap, which was laid down earlier by the Indira Savni judgment. So this is a landmark judgment, because it allows the government to extend the reservation over and above the 50% in this case, that is, in providing reservation for the economically weaker sections. If you look at the minority judgment, the two judges who didn't agree with this, that was Justice Ravindra Bhatt and Chief Justice of India, U. Lalit. These were the two judges of the Supreme Court who passed the minority judgment. They have labeled this reservation as unconstitutional. They have struck down this reservation by arguing that it is violative of right to equality and it is discriminatory because it is providing reservation only for the general category and excludes SCs, STs, OBCs without a valid justification. These two judges, they accepted that economic backwardness can be a criteria, which was not mentioned in the Constitution before. Previously, Constitution provided only for social and educational backwardness. So these judges, they accepted that economic criteria definitely deserves to be seen as a ground for providing reservation. But by excluding the other communities, the government has violated the right to equality. As according to these two judges, it is a breach of Article 15, as the state is discriminating on the lines of caste, and hence they struck down the 103rd Constitutional Amendment Act. But the judgment, the final judgment, was 3:2. So majority judgment was in favor of the law, and hence the 10% EWS quota has been upheld by the Supreme Court. So these are the important developments, concepts, and facts that you should be aware with. You should be aware of these important points. Now, as I come to the end of the discussion of this topic, I would like to give you a practice question, just to give you an idea as to what kind of questions can come from this topic. Consider the following statements with regard to Article 15. It states that the state shall not discriminate against any citizen on the grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, and place of birth. Second statement says it does not prevent the state from making any special provision for the advancement of any socially, educationally backward classes of citizens, or for SC/ST community, or for economically weaker sections. Which of the above statements are correct? Now, can you guys try and let me know the answer in the comments? Try to read the statements carefully. Check both statements 1 and 2 and see whether it's correct or wrong. As I see here, many are saying option A, option C, option B. Looks like it's a split verdict. The right answer is, please make a correction here, small correction. This should be option C here. The correct answer is option C. Both the statements are correct, both 1 and 2. I just told you Article 15 says the state cannot discriminate on the lines of religion, race, caste, sex, and place of birth. So obviously statement 1 is right. Statement 2 is also correct. State has the powers to make special provisions for socially backward communities, educationally backward communities, SC, STs, of course, the EWS, economically weaker sections. That is Article 15, Clause 4, 16, Clause 4. And the new provisions, Article 15, Clause 6 and 16, Clause 6. They provide for this policy of affirmative action. So second statement is also right. So both the statements are correct, and hence option C is the right answer. Now let's take up some questions on this topic before I proceed further. First question, sir, EWS quota is not binding on state governments to introduce this as per the recent judgment. Yes, you're absolutely right. Because see, this subject, it falls under the concurrent list, where both center and state have concurrent powers. Center has already started implementing this reservation, but it is left to the respective states. The states will have to bring out the required laws to extend this reservation within the respective jurisdiction. Few states are already doing it, but yes, it is not binding on all the states. Okay, let's take a look at few other questions. Raza is asking, sir, why there is more reservation for OBCs at 27%? Yes, OBCs have been given 27% reservation. Why? This was based on the recommendations of the Mandal Commission. The studies conducted with the Mandal Commission pointed out that there are many backward classes in India. And to account for them, to account for their backwardness, and to provide for a social push to these communities, the committee recommended 27% reservation. So it was based on the recommendations of the Mandal Commission. Next, Misbah is asking, is reservation quota present in other countries as well? Yes, there are other countries as well which provide the policy of affirmative action. Dinesh is asking, Tamil Nadu government opposes this judgment. Can they review the case in Supreme Court? Yes, of course. There could be a challenge against this judgment as well. The case could be referred to a higher judge bench. A 7-judge constitutional bench can take up the case again. So either a state government or any citizen or any political party could still challenge the judgment and again ask the Supreme Court to review it. So a 7-judge bench will then look into the case again. Tarun is asking, what if the states make reservations for their political will? Are there any regulations to keep legislature under check? See, this is where the flaw arises with regard to the policy of affirmative action. The government has the powers to bring about a law pushing for reservation for communities, and if it backs it up with some evidence, some report, the government, and if it gets the bill passed through the legislature, it can bring about reservation for any community. Unfortunately, this is where political parties have misused the policy of quotas. They have misused it for electoral gains. They have repeatedly extended reservations, brought various castes and subcastes which may not be entirely deserving of reservation under the reservation category. Even the concept of creamy layer, even though it has been implemented, many times there are cases in the real world where people who are already benefiting from reservation are again taking the benefits of reservation policy generations after generations. The really backward and oppressed people are still fighting for their rights, whereas the vested interests within each community, within SCs, STs, OBCs, they have repeatedly cornered the benefits for themselves, the elites within each community. So this is where the controversy arises. the policy of reservation has been heavily politicized, mainly for electoral gains. Sarabjit is asking, does this topic has any relevance for mains? Absolutely. The topic has great relevance for mains as well. UPSC could ask you to evaluate the Supreme Court's judgment or illustrate the provisions of Article 15 and Article 16, or critically examine the 103rd Constitutional Amendment Act. So on these grounds, you can get a mains question as well. Sanjeev is asking, can Parliament take steps against reservation? Yes, definitely. Why not? Parliament can take measures against reservation, but no party is going to do that, right? No ruling party would do that, because that would mark the end of that government. So it is this close link between policy of reservation and elections, which has led to the misuse of reservation as a tool. Otherwise, the policy of affirmative action would have been very beneficial to uplift the genuinely backward communities. Like SCs and STs were totally deserving of it during independence, right when India became independent, because these communities had been oppressed socially for centuries together. India's oppressive caste system had oppressed these communities. The lower caste had been oppressed by the upper caste. So there was social, educational backwardness, economic backwardness amongst these communities. They had been ostracized. Untouchability was widely prevalent. It is still prevalent even today in India. So to address these social issues, the policy of affirmative action was a great tool. But over the years, over the last 70 odd years, successive governments, various parties have misused reservation again and again to satisfy their vote banks, their respective electorates, and thus the whole issue has been heavily politicized. Okay, so with this, I would like to get back to the discussion, and let's take a look at the next topic, the second topic. The second topic is also from Indian polity. Last week, the center has established the 22nd Law Commission of India. So from a prelims point of view, especially, this topic is very, very important. You can expect a direct question on the Law Commission of India. So you need to understand what is the Law Commission of India, what is its role, what is its mandate, what is its composition, and we should also talk about the achievements of the Law Commission of India, which can be relevant for your mains exam. This topic is in news because last week, the Government of India has established the 22nd Law Commission of India with retired Justice Rituraj Avasthi as the chairman of the Law Commission. The Union Law Minister, Kiran Rijiju, he tweeted that the former Chief Justice of the Karnataka High Court, that is retired Justice Rituraj Avasthi, will be appointed as the chairperson of the 22nd Law Commission of India, and 5 members have also been appointed by the government. 5 members, which includes Justice K.T. Shankaran, Professor Anand Paliwal, Professor D.P. Verma, Professor Raka Arya, and Sri Karunanidhi. So 5 members have been appointed by the government, and retired Justice Rituraj Avasthi shall be the chairperson of the 22nd Law Commission of India. So this was the development. Now this helps you understand the composition of the Law Commission of India. The Law Commission of India shall be headed by a chairperson who is usually a retired judge. Usually it will be a judge of the Supreme Court who has retired, or a Chief Justice of a High Court. So senior retired judges are appointed as a chairperson of the Law Commission of India. And to assist the chairperson, 5 members are appointed. 5 members are appointed, out of whom at least 1 shall be from the judiciary. This is usually the convention, the norm. 1 or 2 members will be drawn from the judiciary itself, that is retired judges again. Again, 1 or 2 members would be experts, non-government experts, either from think tanks or the academia or the civil society. Legal experts especially, who have constitutional expertise, they are drawn in, and 1 or 2 members are brought in from the political opposition as well. So this is generally the composition, where you have 1 chairperson and 5 members, and the government establishes this committee through a notification. the government will notify the establishment of the commission in the official gazette. And this commission has a unique role to perform. Is that clear? It has a very unique role to perform. If you trace the history, the origin of the Law Commission, it actually goes back to colonial times. Even during the colonial period, there were law commissions being constituted by the British to examine the various laws that were being introduced. As you know, the British would bring out various laws like the Government of India Act 1935, the Morley Minto reforms, Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, etc. Along with that, they would also bring out various specific laws as well, like Indian Penal Code, the Criminal Procedure Code, and the others. So to examine the legal framework, to review it, to study the laws and to suggest changes, to suggest an upgradation of the laws or to repeal outdated laws. Even the British were appointing law commissions. This was before independence. Post-independence, after India became independent, we borrowed some of the colonial era laws. And Article 372 states that, Article 372 of the Indian Constitution states that the pre-constitution laws shall continue. Those laws which are needed shall be continued unless and until they are amended or repealed. There were some laws which were required to run the state post-independence as well. So we inherited a number of laws from the British, continued it post-independence, and this was enabled by Article 372 of the Constitution. These British laws would continue unless and until they are amended or repealed by the Parliament. Now, can someone tell me who has these powers? Who has the powers to amend a law or repeal the law? Can you tell me in the comments? Very good. Majority of you are getting it right. It's the Parliament. Right? This is the exclusive jurisdiction of the Parliament. The Parliament has the powers to amend a law or repeal a law. So unless the colonial era laws are amended or repealed, these laws shall continue in our law books. This is what we provided for under Article 372. Now, post-independence, a lot of demands started coming up to amend and repeal the British era laws because they were outdated or they were extremely stringent and draconian because the laws were designed to fulfill British interests. It wouldn't be suitable for a democratic India post-independence. So post-independence, a lot of opposition came up from political parties within the Parliament to update the outdated laws or to remove some of the outdated laws which were from the British era. So this triggered a demand for the Law Commission post-independence, and the first Law Commission of India was established in the year 1955. Is that clear? It's a very important fact. In 1955, the first Law Commission of India was established to review the legal framework, all the laws that we have, and to suggest any changes, any upgradation, to suggest the removal of certain laws, that is the repealing of certain laws, to suggest the introduction of any new laws that are needed. So for this, the Law Commission of India was constituted, and since then, we have had 22 law commissions, including the latest one. Now, please take down a very important fact. The Law Commission generally is given a 3-year term by the government, and the government will specify its terms of reference. When the government is establishing the Law Commission through a government notification, it specifies that this commission will have a 3-year term. It's a very important fact for prelims. And the objectives of this commission, the mandate, is specified by the government, which is nothing but the terms of reference. The government will specify what focus areas should be prioritized by the Law Commission. So this Law Commission essentially carries out research in the field of law. This is the function of the Law Commission of India. Its function is to conduct expert research into the laws that we have, the laws that have been operationalized. And based on this review, based on this thorough expert research and review, the commission can provide for recommendations to the government by bringing out reports. Till date, 277 reports have been submitted by various law commissions of India. The 21 law commissions of India before the latest one, In total, they have submitted 277 reports to the government, and many of the reports have been accepted, and it has led to legal reforms in India. If you look at the Law Ministry's website, or if you visit the website of Law Commission of India, it is clearly highlighted that the Law Commission of India provides excellent thought-provoking and vital review, thought-provoking ideas and vital review of the laws in India. So it essentially functions like a think tank. It conducts academic research. It thoroughly examines the legal framework in India, takes a look at all the laws that we have, examines the legal landscape, and suggests the changes that are needed. The changes could be anything, either amending the existing laws or repealing the outdated laws or bringing in new laws to suit the interests of the current times. So this is the function of the Law Commission of India. And if you look at its vision and mission statement, it has been stated on its website that reforming the laws for maximizing justice in society and promoting good governance under the rule of law is the stated vision of Law Commission of India. Its primary focus is on promoting rule of law. The law of the land should be supreme and ensure that max justice is delivered to every section of the society by reforming the legal system, and promote good governance by providing for sound legal framework. This is the vision of Law Commission of India. And its mission is to suggest the repeal of obsolete laws. Laws which are outdated can be suggested for repeal, to conduct a thorough audit of the socio-economic legal framework, laws which deal with social and economic development, review the judicial administration in the country, the laws dealing with judicial administration. And while reviewing these laws, the Law Commission is driven by the principles that are laid out in the preamble under the fundamental rights and the principles laid out under the directive principles of state policy. This is the guiding framework for the Law Commission of India. When it is carrying out its review work, the guiding principles are drawn from the preamble, fundamental rights, and the directive principles of state policy, or DPSPs. This is what guides the functioning of Law Commission of India to maximize justice by reforming the laws and to provide for good governance so that rule of law can be promoted. Understood? So please be familiar with the composition, the role and functions, the term, and the vision and mission of Law Commission of India. Now, from a mains point of view, I would like to talk about some of the achievements of Law Commission of India. What impact has the Law Commission had through its reports? This will just give you a basic idea. It can be relevant for prelims as well, but it is more relevant for your mains. So just take a look at the important achievements of Law Commission of India. See, the British era law commissions, the pre-independence law commissions that we had, they had recommended number of legal changes, they recommended number of new laws. And it's based on these recommendations that the British administration had introduced many important laws such as the Code of Criminal Procedure, the Female Infanticide Prevention Act, the Indian Contract Act, Indian Evidence Act, Indian Companies Act, Divorce Act, Land Acquisition Act, etc. All these are colonial era legislations. These laws were brought in by the British based on the recommendations of the then law commissions. So even prior to independence, law commissions were making an impact. Their suggestions were being considered seriously by the British administration in India. Now, post-independence, as I mentioned, 21 law commissions of India in total. They have submitted 277 reports till date, out of which 92 reports have been implemented by the government. This can be an important fact. Out of the 277 reports that have been submitted till date, 92 reports have been accepted and implemented by the government. It led to the new Code of Criminal Procedure, which was enacted in 1973, that reformed criminal laws in India. through various reports from 1955 to 1970, the Law Commission kept pushing the government to reform the criminal laws as they were outdated. The Code of Criminal Procedure was enacted in 1872. It was meant to serve British interests, to target India's freedom struggle and national movement. It had no place in a post-independent India, and through various recommendations, the Law Commission of India played a role in pushing the government to reform the criminal laws in India, and thus the new Code of Criminal Procedure was enacted in 1973. Another important contribution is the Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act, also popularly known as RTE, Right to Education. This was also one of the recommendations of Law Commission of India, which was provided in report number 165. In the field of environment ecology, you would have heard about NGT, the National Green Tribunal. This quasi-judicial body, which was set up to fast-track environment-related cases, was established through the NGT Act of 2010. This was also a result of recommendations given by the Law Commission. Then around 1,500 central laws have been repealed as they were outdated. Based on recommendations of Law Commission of India, around 1,500 outdated laws have been repealed. They have been removed from our law books. A very important change was introduced in 2015 through the High Court bill to India's judicial system. The Law Commission of India recommended few changes to commercial courts, division courts, and appellate tribunals, which was introduced by the government through the High Court bill in 2015. At the state level, there was a major transformation in judiciary at the local level that was introduced based on recommendations of the Law Commission of India. The amendment done to Arbitration and Conciliation Act. This was also based on recommendations of Law Commission of India, and a number of electoral reforms which have been aimed at strengthening the Election Commission has also been based on the Law Commission reports. So this, in short, is the contribution of Law Commission of India through its various reports that have been submitted. So the 22nd Law Commission, it has been set up after a gap of almost 3 years, because the term of the 21st Law Commission ended in 2018 itself. But because of the pandemic and due to other issues at the central government, the government had delayed the appointment of the 22nd Law Commission. There had been a 3.5 year delay in appointing the 22nd Law Commission. Pressure was mounting on the government to fast track the appointment of the next Law Commission. So finally, last week, the government has notified the establishment of the 22nd Law Commission, which is going to take a look at various laws that exist in India, and it will conduct a thorough review, and it will be expected to submit reports through which it will suggest amendments, repealing of outdated laws, suggestions for new laws, etc. So now, I would like to give you a practice question here. The Law Commission of India is a constitutional body, statutory body, regulatory body, non-statutory body. Try and answer this question. Let's see if I can launch a poll for this. Okay, the poll is live. Go ahead and select the right option. Please think about what we discussed. If you understood the establishment of Law Commission of India, how it is established, you can easily answer this question. Majority of them have said option B and option A. 35% are saying it's option B. 19% have said it's option D. The right answer is option D. Many of you have got it wrong. Law Commission of India is a non-statutory body. It is not set up through a law. What do you mean by a statutory body? Statutory body is an organization or a body which is set up through a law. There is a legal backing to it. The law would have been passed in the parliament. I clearly told you that the government issues a notification. It issues a notification in the official gazette notifying the establishment of the Law Commission. So that clearly makes Law Commission of India a non-statutory body. It is not backed by any law. It's not set up by the parliament. It is set up directly by the government through a gazette notification. It's not mentioned in the constitution. It's not a constitutional body. It's not a regulatory body. It's not regulating any sector. It is clearly a non-statutory body. Option D is the correct answer here. That is why you have to pay attention to these fine details. UPSC is going to test you on these lines. The question might appear to be very simple, but if you lack the conceptual clarity, you will get the answer wrong, even though you're aware of the topic. So please avoid those mistakes and pay attention to the details. All right. Now, moving on to the next topic from environment and ecology, a very, very important development. Mangrove Alliance for Climate has been established at the ongoing Climate Change Convention. As you're aware, COP27 is currently being held at Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Sharm el-Sheikh is a very popular resort town in Egypt, known for hosting many high-profile diplomatic events. So here, the 27th Conference of Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change is taking place. Right? So last week, at the Climate Change Convention, the Mangrove Alliance for Climate has been launched. It has been launched by United Arab Emirates and Indonesia. And India has also joined this initiative. India has become a founding member of this initiative. Here in the image, you can see the environment ministers of the respective countries who have joined this initiative. The initiative was proposed by UAE, United Arab Emirates. It was backed by Indonesia, and India also has joined the initiative. You can see India's environment minister standing right here. So we have to understand this topic in complete detail. It's a very, very important topic from a prelims point of view. The first point you should remember is that it is spearheaded by UAE and Indonesia. It's a basic fact. The focus of this initiative is to restore the mangrove forests, prevent the degradation of mangrove forests, promote its afforestation, and conserve the mangrove reserves that are present around the world. Because mangrove forests are a fantastic carbon sink which can help us in dealing with climate change. Mangroves are known for their potential as a very effective carbon sink. I will explain what is a carbon sink. We'll come to it. We'll discuss the significance of mangroves. We'll talk about presence of mangroves in India. All these are very, very important facts and concepts that we need to cover. So this initiative which has been launched, it focuses on protecting the mangroves as a natural buffer against climate change. Now let me explain this concept. See, climate change has been primarily triggered by global warming. Correct? Global warming can happen both naturally and as well as through anthropogenic activities, through human-induced activities. Because in the atmosphere, we have something called greenhouse gases. Water vapor itself is a greenhouse gas. Naturally, there are a lot of greenhouse gases released into the atmosphere. For example, volcanic eruptions will release a lot of greenhouse gases. Then wetlands themselves release greenhouse gases like methane. Cattle release methane into the atmosphere. Natural forest fires also releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So naturally, there are a number of greenhouse gases which are released, which have the ability to trap heat in the atmosphere, thereby maintaining ideal global temperatures. These naturally occurring greenhouse gases in their natural concentration, it is ideal to ensure that life on Earth can survive, or else the Earth's ideal average temperature cannot be maintained. But we humans have disrupted this. Since Industrial Revolution, since 1800s, we have burnt fossil fuels without checks, without any checks and balances, and we have contributed to large-scale emissions of greenhouse gases, right? So this has accelerated global warming, thus raising global temperatures around the world. And this affects many other natural processes. It affects all the other biogeochemical cycles. It has affected salinity levels in the ocean. It is leading to the melting of ice caps and glaciers, which is in turn leading to rising of sea levels, etc. So here, the solution to combat against global warming and climate change is to remove some of the greenhouse gases, or at least halt the release of greenhouse gases. Since we have contributed a lot of greenhouse gases, the solution here is to remove that excess greenhouse gas, or at least halt the future production of greenhouse gas emissions. This is the focus of the Climate Change Convention. It is trying to restrict the usage of fossil fuels and other industrial activities which contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. On the other hand, Climate Change Convention is also focused on removal of greenhouse gases by promoting carbon sinks. Carbon sinks have the ability to absorb carbon from the atmosphere. They can absorb CO2 from the atmosphere, which we refer to as sequestration. This is called carbon sequestration. And this carbon, if it is stored away from the atmosphere for centuries, then you're effectively removing greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. This whole process is called carbon sequestration and carbon storage, where excess greenhouse gases are removed from the atmosphere. The removal process is called sequestration, and then it is stored away for a long period of time. So any system or any region which has the ability to do this is called a carbon sink, because it is sinking the carbon into the earth. These carbon sinks can be natural or man-made. It is artificially possible to sequester carbon and try to store the carbon away underground. But this cannot be done on a large scale, obviously because of engineering challenges and financial challenges. But we have many natural carbon sinks. Forests themselves are a natural carbon sink. If you protect your forests, if you prevent deforestation and promote afforestation, trees through photosynthesis will absorb the CO2, and the CO2 will remain locked away within the biomass for a very long period of time. Right? Similarly, mangrove forests are a very effective natural sink. They have the ability to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it away for a very, very long period of time, and they are considered as nature's best carbon sink. So of late, there is increased attention and focus on protecting mangrove forests and also in increasing the mangrove cover around the world. So that is why at the 27th Conference of Parties, this issue has been the focus, and UAE and Indonesia have led the formation of this initiative, the Mangrove Alliance for Climate, which includes India, Sri Lanka, Australia, Japan, and Spain. All these countries have joined this initiative to conserve the mangrove forests and also to promote them. So India has become a founding member, and India's foreign minister stated that by joining this initiative, we can protect the mangroves in India and around the world, which are natural carbon sinks. Thus, we can deal with climate change and we can arrest deforestation. And India, which already has expertise in dealing with mangroves, can share its knowledge and experience with other countries. We can also draw the knowledge and resources from other countries in conserving the mangrove forests. So this would be an intergovernmental alliance, but it would work on a voluntary basis. This is a very important point. It's a voluntary initiative. If countries are interested, they can join, and they will have no binding targets. They will have no binding targets. Also, there is no review mechanism to check whether the countries are meeting their targets. Is that clear? It's not binding. There are no binding targets given, and there is no review mechanism to check whether countries are performing. But countries, those who are responsible, countries which really want to tackle climate change, they can voluntarily join the initiative and announce their own targets with their own deadlines. They can come out with their voluntary contribution. Each member can announce their own target with a deadline and focus on achieving those targets. And in the process, they can share their expertise with the other members. The members of this alliance can share that knowledge, share the resources and experience through which they can help others as well in conserving and protecting the mangrove forests. So that is why it is a very important initiative. See, mangroves, they are usually found in wetland ecosystems. They are found in these intertidal areas in the coastline, along the coastline where land meets sea, where the terrestrial ecosystem meets the marine ecosystem. In between these two ecosystems, you have a transitional ecosystem in the intertidal area where you have constant water logging, especially in backwaters like lagoons, estuaries, deltas, etc. In those transitional ecosystems, there is constant logging of water. There is constant presence of water, standing water, where both fresh water and salt water will be mixing. It's essentially a marshy area. We refer to them as wetland ecosystems. In wetland ecosystems is where you find these shrubs and trees called mangroves, which you can see in this image over here. Mangroves are quite spectacular because they survive in extremely harsh conditions. In these wetlands, the environmental conditions are very harsh. Saline levels can be very high. Salinity is very high in these waters. There will be very, very low oxygen. In these marshy areas, you will not have enough oxygen available for respiration and other basic activities. And also, there is constant presence of water. Any regular tree will not survive in such a condition where there is constant water logging, right? And also, since there is constant water logging, the soil is very weak. It cannot support a heavy tree, a large tree. So there are many challenges for a tree or a plant to survive in a wetland ecosystem, in these intertidal coastal areas. But mangroves have overcome all the challenges through their adaptations. They display many unique adaptations. For example, they have developed prop roots or stilt roots, which you see here, which gives them additional mechanical support. The roots, they branch out and gives extra support for the tree to hold itself, because the soil below is very weak, it can sink. So the root structure itself has evolved, and we have these prop roots or stilt roots that is giving mechanical support to the tree. This is an adaptation that mangroves have undergone. Then from these roots, you see these spike-like structures coming out. These are called pneumatophores. These are special adapted roots where the root pops out like a spike. It have these small pneumatophores on top of it, the small pores, through which the plant breathes in a low oxygen environment. The exchange of gases which are essential for a plant to survive takes place through the pneumatophores. That is how the plant can survive even in low oxygen conditions. Is that clear? Pneumatophores is a great adaptation. Then all the parts of the tree, its root, the leaves, the bark, it has all adapted to the high saline condition. It can remove the excess salt content through a very unique process of transpiration. Through a very unique process of transpiration, it can remove that excess salt. These are plants which are adapted to high saline conditions. They are called halophytes, which are uniquely adapted to the high saline condition. So this plant or tree, which displays so many adaptations, is what really brings strength to the mangroves. Any species which undergoes a lot of adaptations and against a lot of adversity will display a lot of diversity and resilience. Mangroves are one such species which are very diverse and resilient. Any challenge thrown at it by nature, it will overcome, it will adapt to the harsh conditions. So this strengthens the whole ecosystem itself. It's not just mangroves which thrive here. You have an entire world, an entire ecosystem which thrives here. Many animals, aquatic species, birds, migratory birds especially, they all thrive in these ecosystems. A variety of fishes, prawns, crabs, mollusks, algae, they all thrive under the mangroves. That's why mangroves are also referred to as the ocean's nursery. It's called the ocean's nursery. Especially the younger fish, the younger prawns, mollusks, they all survive here, thrive here before they become adults and move out into the open oceans. You even have bigger animals like tigers, crocodiles thriving in mangrove areas. And it's a very important bird area where a lot of migratory birds also nest in the mangrove forests. So from a biodiversity ecology point of view, mangroves are very, very critical. It's a critical resource. And along with this, mangroves are great as a carbon sink. Is that clear? It can perform a great role as a carbon sink because it's very, very efficient in absorbing carbon and storing carbon away as compared to even terrestrial forests. Compared to a regular tree in a terrestrial ecosystem, mangroves are many times more efficient in carbon sequestration and carbon storage. One mangrove tree can sequester the carbon which is sequestered by around 4 terrestrial trees. That is the capacity of a mangrove. Since it's a very diverse species and since its rate of productivity is very high, it keeps absorbing a lot of carbon dioxide to the process of photosynthesis. And this carbon gets stored away very effectively under the ground. Each mangrove tree can store carbon dioxide, which is the equivalent of CO2 stored by around 10 terrestrial trees. So mangroves are many times more efficient than terrestrial trees in carbon sequestration. It can store up to 10 times more carbon per hectare. It can store up to 400% faster as compared to terrestrial trees. So this is the reason why mangroves are the focus of climate action. Researchers, experts, and countries are looking at mangroves as a great carbon sink to help the world meet the climate target, which is to keep the global rise in temperatures under 1.5 degrees Celsius as per the Paris Agreement. The goal is to keep it under 2 degrees Celsius initially, to keep the global rise in temperatures under 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, by 2100, and work towards keeping the global rise in temperatures limited to under 1.5 degrees Celsius. To achieve this ambitious target, mangroves are seen as a great solution as it can act as a very effective carbon sink. And the best part is it is natural. It's a natural buffer. It's a natural solution. Is that clear? So this explains the significance of mangroves and why this alliance has been formed. Now, if you look at the presence of mangroves in India, it is quite well spread out. In South Asia, you do find a healthy mangrove cover, and nearly 50% of mangroves found in South Asia are found in India itself. Please take a look at the map I have shared here. It will help you understand where you can find mangrove forests in India. In West Bengal, Gujarat, this is where you find a very good presence of mangrove forests. Even at the Andaman Nicobar Islands, they report the best density of mangroves. West Bengal, Gujarat, and Andaman Nicobar Islands. Apart from that, all the other coastal states of India, Maharashtra, Goa, Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, even the Union Territory of Puducherry, Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, they all report mangroves along their coastline. Even Lakshadweep Islands as well to an extent. But the best cover is found in West Bengal, Gujarat, and Andaman Nicobar Islands. These mangroves, they also serve a great economic purpose. It provides a lot of economic services to the coastal communities. The fishermen can breed fishes. Commercial fishing can be taken up in mangroves, especially prawn cultivation. Mangroves themselves, the mangrove trees, they have a lot of commercial value in the industry. It finds a lot of applications in medicine, in cosmetics, and in various other industries. So it serves the economic purpose as well and also helps in disaster management. It helps in arresting the impact of cyclones and tsunamis. If a country has a good mangrove cover along the coastline, it will act as a natural shield against the impact of tsunami waves and high-speed winds that are brought in by cyclones, right? So that is why mangroves are so important, and India is blessed with a good resource. According to the Forest Survey report of last year, nearly 5,000 square kilometers of mangrove forests are found in India, which amounts to around 0.15% of India's total geographical area. So India does have a significant presence of mangroves, and West Bengal has the highest percentage of the mangrove cover. Please note down these important points. Followed by West Bengal, it is Gujarat, Andaman Nicobar Islands, as I pointed out. Then you have Maharashtra, Odisha, Andhra, Tamil Nadu, Goa, Kerala, and even Karnataka. All right. So by joining this alliance, India is looking to protect its mangrove cover, and we are even looking to expand the mangrove cover in India. We want to promote afforestation and arrest deforestation. So through a combination of these efforts, we will increase the carbon sink in India, and India wants to share this experience, this knowledge with other member countries. See, under the Paris Agreement goals, under the voluntary targets that India has announced under Paris Agreement, India has committed to create a carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2. India has committed that by the end of this decade, by 2030, through afforestation initiatives, we will increase our forest cover and tree cover so that at least 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon can be sequestered and stored. This is a target India has announced under the Paris Agreement. So joining the Mangrove Alliance for Climate, it is in line with this goal of India. It helps India to fulfill the goal by conserving the mangrove forests, preventing their destruction, and by promoting their afforestation. So through this platform, we will share the knowledge, the expertise of India, and we will learn from the other members as well. So that is why the topic is very, very important. Now coming to the practice question, which of the following protected area in India is known for its mangrove cover? Okay, there are 4 protected areas listed. Now, can you tell me which of them is known for its mangrove cover? Let me launch a poll. The poll is live. Do we have mangrove cover in Nilgiris or Sundarbans or Kaziranga or Dachigam? Think about what we discussed. Imagine the map that I just showed you. So that will easily give you the answer. Very good. Majority of them have got it right. 86% of them are saying it is option B. Sundarbans is one of the largest mangrove reserves in India and the world. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's a Ramsar site as well. It's a tiger reserve as well, right? Nilgiris in Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Kerala doesn't have mangroves. It's present inland. It's a terrestrial ecosystem. Kaziranga is also inland in Assam. Dachigam is in Jammu and Kashmir near Srinagar, right? So they cannot have mangroves. Mangroves are found along the coastline. So that is a clue. Okay, so Sundarbans is the right answer here. Now let's take up another topic from environment and ecology. There was another important development at the Climate Change Convention at the 27th Conference of Parties. The countries have decided to launch a new initiative along with the UN called Methane Alert and Response System, or MARS. So let's cover this important topic, and after that, again, I'll take all your questions and doubts based on the last 3 topics. Okay? So Methane Alert and Response System, or MARS, is a new climate initiative which has been announced at the 27th Conference of Parties to tackle methane emissions. It will specifically focus on tackling methane emissions. This initiative is led by United Nations Environment Programme, or UNEP. Is that clear? Through this initiative, that is Methane Alert and Response System, UN and the member countries, that is UNEP, the member countries and few other organizations, they are going to establish a satellite-based monitoring mechanism to detect global methane emissions. Through Earth observation satellites, through existing satellites and through future satellites, UNEP will devise a system, a global system, to monitor methane emissions around the world. And this is a very, very important initiative. To understand why, first you should know why methane emissions are the special focus at the Climate Change Convention. Why are they launching a separate initiative to track methane emissions? What's the reason? That's because methane is the second most common greenhouse gas after CO2. Amongst all the major greenhouse gases, that is nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, then HFCs and others, sulfur hexafluoride. If you compare all the greenhouse gases, their concentration in the atmosphere, methane is the second most common after CO2. It occupies nearly 17 to 20% of the current emissions. Out of all the greenhouse gases being emitted, 17 to 20% of the emissions are methane emissions. And methane is much more dangerous than CO2. When it comes to global warming, methane is considered to be a much more serious threat than even carbon dioxide. Why? Because methane's global warming potential is 80 times higher than that of CO2. It basically means one molecule of methane, CH4, can capture 80 times more heat than one molecule of carbon dioxide. Is that clear? See, CO2 has the highest concentration amongst greenhouse gases, that is man-made greenhouse gases. If you take natural greenhouse gases like water vapor, then water vapor has the highest concentration, right? But amongst the greenhouse gases that we are targeting, which are released from human activities, CO2 has the highest concentration. Second is methane. And the second largest greenhouse gas is 80 times more deadlier than carbon dioxide because its global warming potential is 80 times more than CO2. That is, one molecule of methane in the atmosphere can capture 80 times more heat than one molecule of CO2. So this is what makes methane a dangerous greenhouse gas. So methane, or CH4, it is emitted from various sources, both natural and man-made activities. It is emitted from natural sources as well, such as wetlands. Wetlands are a big source of methane. Even though wetlands are very good in carbon sequestration, they do release methane as well, because in a waterlogged region, you'll have a lot of organic matter which has fallen down and it all decomposes very slowly. This slow decomposition which happens, the anaerobic decomposition, right, in wetlands where there's no oxygen, it releases methane. It releases a lot of methane. But despite that, wetlands are great carbon sinks because they remove a lot of CO2 and store it away for a very, very long period of time. So this is a natural source of methane emission. Other natural sources include few animals, then volcanic eruptions, and you also have few sediments that contain methane, which can end up releasing methane into the atmosphere. Few animals which regurgitate their food, they belch. That is essentially when they burp, they release a lot of methane, right? Sometimes their excreta also contains a lot of methane. Then volcanic eruptions can also release methane naturally. And there are few sediments as well which undergo weathering and release methane as well. These are the natural sources. But this is not the problem. The problem is the anthropogenic methane which is released. Methane released through human activities such as urban landfills where garbage is dumped, right? The garbage that we dump in landfills, urban landfills, it accumulates and undergoes very slow decomposition and fermentation. So this ends up releasing a lot of methane. The exploitation of fossil fuels, extraction of oil and gas, processing of oil and gas releases a lot of methane. lot of agricultural activities like rice cultivation, paddy cultivation, because rice field or paddy field is a type of a wetland. It's a man-made wetland. In paddy field as well, there is constant water logging. So this again results in anaerobic decomposition of the organic matter and releases methane into the atmosphere. Then enteric fermentation and manure of cattle, the ruminant category of cattle, cows, buffaloes, etc. Right? So these animals which are reared in the animal husbandry industry, they emit a lot of methane because they have the habit of regurgitating their food and they release a lot of methane, and they also, even during excretion as well, in the excreta, they also release a lot of methane. So in this process of fermentation and manure, a lot of methane is released. This is a result of human activities. It's coming from the animal husbandry industry. Then you have the fossil fuel industry, as I pointed out, and few other industrial processes like coal mining, wastewater treatment, and few other industrial activities. So methane has become a very serious threat because due to its global warming potential and high concentration, it can lead to a significant increase in global temperatures. If we have to achieve the target of Paris Agreement and to keep global temperatures under 2 degrees and under 1.5 degrees, we have to tackle methane emissions. According to IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, methane emissions have to be cut by 30% by the end of the decade, which has been taken up by the Global Methane Pledge if we have to achieve the Paris goal. According to a latest report of IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we have to cut methane emissions by 30% by the end of the decade, which is a goal taken up by the Global Methane Pledge. Global Methane Pledge was adopted last year at COP26. At the 26th Conference of Parties, which was held at Glasgow in United Kingdom, countries launched this initiative called Global Methane Pledge, where many countries have pledged to cut methane emissions by 30% by the end of the decade as compared to 2020 levels. This alone is estimated to decrease global temperatures by around 0.2 degrees Celsius by the middle of this century. So this important pledge was taken last year at the Glasgow Conference of Parties, and now the countries are adding to it by launching the Mars Initiative along with United Nations Environment Program. To achieve the ambitious goal of Global Methane Pledge, that is to cut emissions by 30% by 2030, this initiative is being launched to track, monitor, alert, and review methane emissions around the world. It will be a satellite-based tracking mechanism led by UNEP along with many partners such as European Commission, the US government, the Bezos Earth Fund funded by Jeff Bezos of Amazon, International Energy Agency, the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. All these institutions, along with many countries, including India, will participate in the Mars Initiative. India also has taken up the methane pledge to cut methane emissions by 30% by 2030. So the UNEP is going to lead this new initiative, the UN Environment Program, and it is setting up an international methane emissions observatory. By working with space agencies and various other space companies which have satellites in orbit, UNEP is creating a network called IMEO, International Methane Emissions Observatory. Through these Earth observation satellites, methane emissions will be tracked and real-time alerts will be given out to all the stakeholders. If from a particular region, large-scale methane emissions are happening, the alert is given out to various UN bodies, to the respective government, and to the respective authorities so that they can act against this human activity. If a factory is releasing a lot of methane emissions, or if from a particular wetland or a paddy field, a lot of methane emissions are coming out, if from animal husbandry a lot of methane emissions are coming out, it will be pointed out by this system. UNEP will alert all the institutions and stakeholders. So based on this information, respective governments can act against it. Let's say through this system, through the Mars system, a particular oil refinery is spotted in, let's say, Russia to be releasing a lot of methane emissions. So this information will be given to the Russian government and other UN institutions, and Russia can then restrict the activity of this industry and it can curb methane emissions. So to take timely and precise targeted action, this initiative will be very helpful and it is going to play a key role in limiting methane emissions. Is that clear? So please take up a practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? China, US, Russia, India, Brazil, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Mexico are estimated to be responsible for nearly half of all anthropogenic methane emissions. It's a very factual statement. To answer this, you should know which are the top methane emitters of the world. Second statement says largest source of anthropogenic methane emissions is agriculture. So try and let me know which statements are correct. I'll launch the poll in the meantime. So try and understand what the question is asking. We have discussed the second statement, but we haven't covered the first statement. So try and check whether both statements are correct or one of them is correct. 45% are saying it is option C. 36% are saying it's option A. Very good. Option C is the right answer. Option C is the correct answer because both statements are correct. Please remember the first factual statement. And in the same order, China, US, Russia, India, Brazil are the top methane emitters in the world. Okay? These countries here, they account for nearly half of anthropogenic methane emissions. Second statement is also correct because in total, agriculture is the biggest contributor. Just look at the graph here. Agriculture is the biggest contributor of methane emissions amongst human activities. This is wetlands. Wetlands are contributing the highest, but this is a natural emission. It's a natural source. The statement is asking anthropogenic source. So amongst anthropogenic source, the largest contribution comes from agriculture. That is from animal husbandry and from rice cultivation. Next is energy sector. That is oil and gas sector. From oil and gas, you have the second largest methane contribution coming from human activities. So such basic facts are very much needed for you to answer these questions. Shravan is asking, sir, in previous slide, it is mentioned as fossil fuels. No, not really. Please go back and take a look at the slide. The image, it has split rice cultivation and animal husbandry. You have to combine the two. If you combine the two, you'll get emissions from agriculture. So that is much more than emissions coming from fossil fuels. What is UNEP? Kashish is asking, define UNEP. UNEP stands for United Nations Environment Programme. It's an institution of the UN that is focused on environmental issues to conserve the environment, to tackle climate change, etc. It plays a key role with the Climate Change Convention as well. What is anthropogenic? Anthropogenic means any contribution from human activities. Anthropogenic basically means man-made or human contribution. Rosanna is asking, what is enteric fermentation? Enteric fermentation refers to those cattle which regurgitate their food and release methane into the air. Right? Many cattle like cow, buffalo, etc., they belch a lot and release a lot of methane. Even when they excrete, they release a lot of methane. So this is basically fermented. The food they have consumed would have been partially fermented and it releases methane when they belch or when they excrete. What is IMEO? IMEO stands for International Methane Emissions Observatory. International Methane Emissions Observatory. What happens to the carbon that is stored in the carbon sink? Amrita is asking, what happens to carbon stored in carbon sink? The carbon which is stored in the carbon sink will take its natural course. Now, for example, the carbon which is stored in the trees, it will eventually be released into the atmosphere, into the water over a long period of time. It will take centuries. When the tree dies and it decomposes, the carbon will eventually break down. It will enter the food chain as well, maybe, right? Some animals would have consumed the tree, right? So through the process of weathering, through the food chain, eventually the carbon gets released back into the atmosphere. But it will take a long time. It will take a lot of centuries for the carbon which is stored to come back into the atmosphere. But that is through the natural process. Jaya is asking difference between carbon sequestration and carbon storage. Carbon sequestration refers to absorption of CO2 from the atmosphere. Carbon storage refers to storing that carbon deep away from the atmosphere, usually deep in the underground or underwater. So sequestration and storage are linked, but they are different. Nipun is asking, what's the difference between mangrove and wetland? Wetland is an ecosystem. Wetland is a marshy area. In a wetland ecosystem, you might find mangrove forests. Mangrove is a species, a tree species. Suraj Bharati is asking, sir, list of greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases that are dealt with under climate change includes carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, then HFCs and CFCs, right? Sulfur hexafluoride or SF6. These are the major greenhouse gases. The CFCs which were replaced through Montreal Protocol, right? They were replaced with HFCs and HCFCs, hydrofluorocarbons, right? But these HFCs and HCFCs, they became a potent greenhouse gas. So even that is targeted under the Montreal Protocol. Prithviraj is asking, is there any data for sewage water methane? Not needed. Such specific data is not needed. It's irrelevant for the exam. Okay, moving on. Next, we have few small topics. So we have covered all the big important topics which are more conceptual. So now we'll be looking at the next 4 topics which are more factual, and these are smaller topics as well, but nevertheless, they are very important. So let me take you through these next 4 topics. We'll discuss them one by one, and at the end, I'll take all your doubts and questions again. So here, I'll not give you a practice question. Not needed, because the topic itself is a very small topic. We'll start with a topic from science and technology, specifically from space technology. Okay. The topic is Vikram S, which is India's first private rocket. Why is this topic in news? The topic is in news because an Indian private space company, Skyroot Aerospace, has developed India's first launch vehicle. This is the first private launch vehicle developed by a private space company. It was supposed to be launched by today, but due to bad weather, the launch has been delayed. And within few days, Vikram S will be launched by Skyroot with the help of ISRO. This private launch vehicle is carrying 3 commercial satellites on board, which will be inserted into a suborbital path. And the mission has been named Prarambh, or the beginning, because this marks the beginning of India's private launches. This is the first launch of a private rocket in India. So here you need to collect few important facts, and you should also become aware of an important analysis from a prelims point of view. You can see the Vikram S rocket here in the image. It's been named after Vikram Sarabhai, the founding father of India's space program. This rocket is a single stage rocket, and this is the first privately developed launch vehicle that has a cryogenic engine, liquid hypergolic stage, and a solid fuel-based rocket stage. The rocket has been assembled by using 3D printing technology, and it has used advanced composite material which has been indigenously developed in India. Because rocket components require special materials, right? ISRO had pioneered these materials through metallurgical research. So now a private company has developed advanced composite material and has used 3D printing to develop some of the components. And it uses a mix of propulsion technology, including the advanced cryogenic stage, solid and liquid fuel. And this rocket is designed to carry small satellites into orbit. The rocket itself is a very small rocket. It can't be compared with the large PSLV or GSLV of ISRO. But the intention is to launch small satellites on small payloads into orbit. It will help in accelerating commercial launches. It will help in promoting space research, because a lot of small satellites like micro satellites, nano satellites, pico satellites, these small satellites which hardly weigh 1 or 2 kilograms or few hundred grams, they are placed in suborbit, in the low Earth orbit, to conduct a lot of scientific research, to also enable communication, Earth observation, etc. So all these activities will be enabled and commercial launches can benefit, and India can become the hub of commercial launches. ISRO is already known for providing reliable and cheap launch options for foreign vendors. So this initiative, where ISRO is helping private space startups to venture into this area, will open up a new sector in India, and it will allow India to compete with countries like US, China, Japan, Russia, the European Space Agency, and the others. If you look at US, you have many big private space players. You have SpaceX of Elon Musk. You have Blue Origin of Jeff Bezos. So like this, you have many private space companies in US which have made rapid advances. They're accelerating US space program by assisting NASA in various commercial missions. This gives NASA the time to focus on core research, space exploration, and other big missions. So ISRO is also setting out on this path ever since India opened up the space sector for private participation in 2020. Until recently, space was a reserved sector, a strategic sector meant only for the public domain, where ISRO was the only player. But now, the Department of Space, which administers ISRO reports to the Department of Space, has opened up this sector in 2020 and allowed for greater private participation. The idea is to transfer the technology from ISRO. ISRO has already pioneered rocket and satellite building technology. In fact, even before these reforms, big private companies like L&T, Mahindra, Tata, and others, they were already involved in manufacturing and fabrication for ISRO. Many of the rocket components, satellite components were being manufactured and fabricated by private companies. This will save precious time, money, and resources for ISRO, so ISRO can focus more on research and development and outer space exploration. It can focus on big missions to Mars, then Moon, and beyond, right? Whereas launching satellites, launching rockets for various missions, this could be completely outsourced to the private industry. So with this goal in mind, India is opening up to the private space sector, and Skyroot became the first private space company to sign a contract with ISRO. So ISRO has assisted the company, and the company also has developed indigenous technology through which the Vikram S rocket or launch vehicle has been developed. It is all set to launch 3 satellites, 2 of them for Indian customers. It will be carrying small student satellites built by few research students, and it will be launching a satellite for a foreign vendor as well. So this launch, if it is successful, it will open up a completely new era in our space domain. It will bring in a lot of investments into the sector. In fact, this company has already got a lot of investments. There are many other private players, startups which are taking root in the space industry. It will boost India's space ambitions, and it will make India a major hub for cheap and reliable launches so that foreign vendors can come to India to get their satellites launched either through ISRO or through the private companies which are building their own launch vehicles. The idea is to bring down the cost of a launch, reduce the time needed for organizing a mission, so that foreign universities, foreign companies will start depending on ISRO and the private companies to get their satellites launched from India. Just take a look at this question. One last practice question. Which of the following acts as commercial arms of India's space program? Is it Antrix Corporation, New Space India Limited, or IN-SPACe? Let me launch a quick poll for this. Which of the following organizations act as commercial arms of India's space program? Is it 1 and 2, 3, or all of them? 49% are saying option D. Very good. Majority of them are saying option D is the right answer. You're absolutely right. All the three are commercial arms of Department of Space. Antrix Corporation is the oldest. It has been the commercial arm of ISRO, handling commercial satellite launches of ISRO. Recently, NSIL was set up as a public sector unit, New Space India Limited. It is also enabling commercial launches for ISRO. It's handling transfer of technology, collaboration with private industry, etc. And IN-SPACe has also been set up, Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center, to grant approvals and to regulate activities in the private space industry, which is coming up in India. It will regulate the activities of the private space companies in India, grant necessary approvals and permissions, so that our private space companies can also grab a share of the global space market. All right. So that is why this topic is very, very important. Next, the State of Food and Agriculture Report of 2022. This was published last week. It was published by a very important organization, the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization. The FAO has brought out this annual report called the State of Food and Agriculture Report. So with regard to the report, you should know a few basic details. There is an important concept that the report is highlighting, it is focusing on. That is the theme of the report, in fact. The priority focus of the report is on a particular issue, and you should be aware of this. And you should also know about Food and Agriculture Organization. It's a very, very important institution. These two topics are very important for your prelims. This report of Food and Agriculture Organization, it mainly focuses on the theme of automation in agriculture. I hope all of you understand what is automation. Automation is the introduction of machinery and smart technology and artificial intelligence in agriculture. Automation could mean anything. The usage of agricultural machinery and implements like tractors, harvesters, etc. Or advanced technology like smart sensors, irrigation which is controlled through sensors, spraying of fertilizers and pesticides through automated systems, or artificial intelligence driven agri-management systems. All these technologies, from something as simple as a tractor to something as sophisticated as artificial intelligence. All these technologies which enable agriculture, they fall under automation agriculture. Today, you are seeing a lot of automation taking place in agriculture. From many decades, with the introduction of farm machinery, with the introduction of agriculture machinery, there was an extent of automation which had already happened. Now, with the advent of computing, internet, high-speed internet, and artificial intelligence, we are seeing the evolution of smart agriculture, where farm fields are controlled by sensors, where irrigation, pest management, fertilizer management is handled by smart algorithms, right? So this is the focus of the report. The report is focusing on the advantages of this technology for sustainable development, because this technology can increase agricultural productivity. It will solve the problem of hunger. It will ensure food security through increased productivity, and it will help tackle hunger, which is one of the sustainable development goals. It can help tackle poverty by increasing income for farmers and those who are dependent on agriculture. Plus, also, this technology is environment friendly because it provides for efficient management of resources like water, fertilizers, etc. So that is why Food and Agriculture Organization has focused on this important issue of agriculture automation. Is that clear? It is playing an important role in agriculture today. It provides for achieving sustainable development goals like tackling hunger, climate change, tackling poverty, etc. And it is also seen to be environment friendly if it is used in the right way. But the problem is that there is a huge divide in the adoption of this technology, and that is, technology is largely limited to developed countries, the rich developed countries, and in developing countries or underdeveloped countries, it is largely limited to the big corporations, to big companies or rich farmers. And this technology is not affordable or accessible to small-time farmers, poor farmers. It's largely not accessible to developing, underdeveloped nations. It's become a prerogative of the developed countries and the rich countries. They are drawing all the benefits of agriculture automation. In developing, underdeveloped nations, only the rich farmers, the large companies, only they are employing the technology. They have access to machinery. But small and marginal farmers are getting left behind. Developing nations, the middle income countries, low income countries, poor nations, underdeveloped countries, they are getting left behind. So this divide is the focus of the report. The report points out how countries like Japan, US, even Russia and European countries have already adopted these technologies on quite a large scale, right? Starting right from tractors and harvesters to artificial intelligence. These countries have already adopted these technologies on a large scale. But countries like India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, they're falling behind. And in these developing, underdeveloped nations, only the big companies, big agricultural companies, food processing industries, then rich farmers who own large tracts of land, only they have access to this technology. So the report is trying to address the divide by providing few recommendations. It's calling upon governments to create a sustainable rental model through a mobile application where people can rent the tools and the machinery. Now, just like you use an app to book a cab, either Ola or Uber, right? There are many applications available through which we can rent and hire various services today. You can even hire a lot of equipment today and return it back. So on similar lines, the concept is to develop a rental model, a subscription model, where farmers can, instead of buying them, because these technologies, the machinery can be very expensive, it's not affordable. But a farmer can pay the hiring charges, the rental charges. So the report is recommending that countries should create a sustainable rental mechanism by working with the private sector. So this will make the technology accessible to everyone. Farmers need not buy the expensive equipment. They should just hire them on rent, pay a subscription for the time they are using it. It also recommends a social protection for the workers who are going to lose their jobs due to automation. Since machinery, equipment, and technology will be used, number of farmers and workers, laborers might lose their jobs. So it is calling for social protection for them, to create insurance or pension for them, to provide for alternate livelihood, etc. And it calls upon all the countries to ensure that agriculture automation is inclusive and sustainable. So if you're aware of these basic recommendations and the issue which it is highlighting, it is more than sufficient. Finally, take a look at FAO itself. It's an important international organization for your prelims. You should know the basic facts about FAO. It is a specialized agency of the UN. It was set up in 1945 and it is headquartered in Rome, Italy. The primary goal of this organization is to tackle hunger, promote food security. This is the primary goal of the Food and Agriculture Organization. It tries to improve the global food markets, tries to deal with agriculture related issues. It tries to ease the supply crunch which comes up once in a while that threatens food security. So all these issues related to food supplies and agriculture, they are handled by FAO, which is a specialized agency of the UN. It brings out annual reports, the State of the World report, in the field of food and agriculture, which we just spoke about. It brings out similar reports on forestry, fisheries, and natural resources. So please remember these 4 reports. FAO brings out 4 reports in total: Food and Agriculture report, which we spoke about, the forestry report, fisheries report, and report on natural resources. So there can be a basic prelims question on FAO itself, that it is a specialized agency of the UN. It brings out these reports. This is the goal of FAO. So on these basic facts, you can expect a prelims question. Now coming to the last 2 topics, both are from environment and ecology. They were in news. Very small topics, but you should be familiar with these 2 species that we are going to discuss in the next 5 minutes. Last week, a unique bee species called the Indian black honey bee was in news. It was widely covered by various newspapers because it's quite rare to discover a new species of honeybee. Believe it or not, there are only 11 species of honeybees in the world, and India has just 1 or 2. So a new honeybee species has been discovered which is native to the Western Ghats. Please write down this point. It is endemic to the Western Ghats of southern India. Okay? This species has been named as Apis carinjodion, and the common name is Indian black honeybee, which you can see here in the image. This is the first discovery of a honeybee, a new honeybee species in India after 2 centuries. After 200 years, a new species of honeybee has been found in India. The last discovery was made by a British zoologist known as Fabricius in 1798. This British researcher identified the first and only major species of honeybee in India, which is Apis indica. Is that clear? But this finding had been disputed. Many researchers had not accepted this as a new species. A lot of scientific evidence had to be brought out by researchers. They had to bring out high resolution images of the bee and compare it with other species. And only then it was accepted as a separate species. That is Apis indica. Other than Apis indica, the other major species in India is Apis cerana. Okay, these are the 2 major species of honeybee which is cultivated in India and also found naturally in India. Now researchers have found a 3rd new species in India which has been named as Apis carinjodion. Is that clear? This has a very important significance. This new species has reportedly evolved from Apis cerana itself. Apis cerana, which is found around India, it has specifically undergone evolution in the Western Ghats, where you have a unique climatic condition. You have a hot and humid condition in the Western Ghats, and this honeybee, the new species which has been found, it has adapted to these conditions and it is seen as an evolved version of Apis cerana, the major dominant honeybee in India. This has been confirmed through DNA research as well. The researchers who brought out this new species, they have brought up DNA evidence to justify their claims. The National Center for Biotechnology Information, NCBI, it maintains a gene bank, a genetic bank, and the researchers have worked with the National Center for Biotechnology Information to bring out the DNA analysis of this honeybee, which has clearly established it as a separate species from other lineages that exist in India and around the world. So this has come out in a research paper. It has been peer reviewed as well. And you should know the range of this honeybee, where exactly it is found. It is found in the Western Ghats and the Nilgiri ranges of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Kerala, and Goa. These are the states where this new species of honeybee is found. Now, this has commercial significance as well, because the honey produced by this new species, it is thicker, it can produce more quantity of honey as well. So it has implications for apiculture in India. Is that clear? The new species of honeybee produces better quality honey and thicker honey. So it can hold significance in the apiculture sector to boost honey production in India. So that is why the topic is important, and it is listed as near threatened on the IUCN Red List. So threat level is pretty low for this species. So these are some important facts you should know about the Indian black honeybee, as you can expect a prelims question on this. Now let me take you to the last topic, the last small topic to discuss, the Himalayan grey langur, which you can see here in the image. This primate species was in news last week. It's a very important topic. A new study was brought out, which was covered by various media outlets, according to which the Himalayan grey langur chooses a different diet based on the altitude where it is found. This was the research finding. See, this langur, it is specific to a part of Himalayas. That's why it's called the Himalayan grey langur. It's found only in the Himalayas, that too specifically in certain regions. I'll tell you where. These langurs, they are found in the higher reaches of the Himalayas, in the higher altitudes. And those monkeys, those langurs which live in the lower altitudes, they have a different diet. Those which live in slightly higher altitudes, they have a slightly different diet. So this was a research finding that was brought out. So in this context, you should know the conservation status of the Himalayan grey langur, where it can be found, what is its diet. If you're familiar with these basic facts, it is more than sufficient. The Himalayan grey langur is also known as the Chamba sacred langur, because it is found in the Chamba Valley of Himachal Pradesh. It is found in the Chamba Valley of Himachal Pradesh. This is where the main concentration of these langurs can be found. It is also reported in parts of Jammu and Kashmir, Pakistan, and Nepal. It is limited to these areas. There are very few numbers left in the wild. According to research, hardly around 1,500 individuals are left. That is why it is an endangered species on the IUCN Red List. Please write down the conservation status. It is found only in Himachal Pradesh, Jammu and Kashmir, parts of Nepal and Pakistan. Sometimes it has been sighted in Uttarakhand, very rarely. There are hardly around 1,500 left in the wild. That is why it has been listed as endangered on the IUCN Red List. This is a very unique primate because it's a colobine. Colobine is such a primate which eats only leaves. It's a leaf-eating monkey. It does not eat anything else other than leaves. It's a colobine. That is what is unique about the Himalayan grey langur. These langurs that were found in lower altitudes, they were seen to be eating leaves. But those which were found in higher altitudes, they were eating only fruits and flowers. There is a slight change that researchers have noticed in their diet, depending on which altitude the monkeys are residing in. This could possibly be because of the availability of the trees. In lower altitude of Himalayas, you have different types of trees. In higher altitude, you have different types of trees, right? So generally, these monkeys, they feed only on leaves. But some of them in the higher reaches were seen to be consuming fruits and flowers only. Now, this has significance for conservation. Since only 1,500 individuals are left, the diet patterns, their behavioral patterns is very, very crucial for their conservation, for conserving this endangered species. Since it's an endangered species, it is very important for our exams. It is native to India, found in the Indian subcontinent. All right. So please make a note of these important points that I have highlighted. So this brings our discussion to an end. We have covered 8 important topics, 4 big topics and 4 minor topics. And I would like to take up few questions, few doubts that you have on the last 4 topics. What is IUCN? IUCN is a conservation organization, the International Union for Conservation of Nature. It is involved in conservation of flora and fauna. It is a research organization and it brings out a red list or a red data book which contains a list of all the threatened species of animals, birds and plants. So IUCN plays a very important role in conservation of biodiversity. Shweta is asking if wetlands are efficient as a carbon sink but still releases methane. So on which should we give more emphasis? See, just understand that wetland does contribute to methane emissions, but it is much more effective as a carbon sink. If you compare the two, if you compare its methane emissions and carbon sequestration, wetlands are many times more effective as a carbon sink. It is very, very effective in tackling climate change. If we reduce methane emissions by 30% by 2030, global temperatures will come down by 0.2 degrees Celsius. By that, you can understand that the methane emissions of wetlands is easily compensated by its carbon sequestration, right? So wetlands are more important, that is mangroves especially, they are more important as a carbon sink as compared to the one disadvantage they have, that is they naturally release methane. NCBI, what is NCBI? It is National Center for Biotechnology Information. It's a biotech research center set up by the Government of India, by the Department of Science and Technology. It specializes in creating a database related to biosciences. It has even set up a gene bank, a genetic bank, where different genetic samples are stored. Pavani and Sona are asking, what does endemic mean? Endemic means that species is native to that place. It is found only in that place. It can't be found anywhere else. So any species, when we say it is endemic to a region, it means it is native to that region. It is found only in that region. You can't find it anywhere else. Manoj and Ashmi are asking, sir, do drones also fall under agriculture automation? Definitely yes. Today, drones are widely being used in agriculture to spray fertilizers, pesticides, even to monitor the crops. So drones are also part of agriculture automation. A student is asking, sir, why the launch of Vikram S rocket has been delayed today? It has been delayed because of adverse weather at Sriharikota, which is the spaceport of India. It has been postponed to 18th November. Simran and Sona are asking, what is Antrix Corporation? Antrix Corporation is the commercial arm of ISRO, which has been facilitating commercial launches. That is foreign satellite launches through ISRO's rockets. Okay, so it's a commercial arm of ISRO that is enabling commercial launches, which fetches revenue for India. Aishwarya is asking, is ISRO a private company? No, ISRO is a public sector company owned by the Government of India. What is cryogenic engine? I see many questions on cryogenic engine. Cryogenic technology involves the combustion of hydrogen and oxygen at extremely low temperatures. Liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen are burnt at very, very low temperatures, and this is referred to as cryogenic combustion. This combustion produces enormous thrust, and it is needed in heavier rockets to lift heavier payload into orbit. So this is a very difficult technology to master because combustion at such low temperatures is very unstable. It's hard to control that reaction. Very few countries have mastered the cryogenic technology, like US, China, then Russia and European countries, and India also has joined the list. The GSLV rockets we have, the GSLV Mark III, right? It has been recently renamed as well. So this rocket, the heavier launch vehicle of ISRO, the last stage of it is cryogenic engine, which uses liquid fuels to burn, to carry out cryogenic combustion at very, very low temperatures. What is MOU? MOU is a memorandum of understanding. It's an agreement, a contract between two parties. Hyperbolic liquid, what is it, sir? It is a liquid fuel, a type of liquid fuel used in rocket engines for combustion. Veena is asking, what is Montreal Protocol? Montreal Protocol is an international agreement between various countries to phase out ozone depleting substances, CFCs or chlorofluorocarbons, right, which were released from various human and industrial activities. They were damaging the ozone layer, causing an ozone hole in the polar areas, especially in the Antarctic, right? So to deal with this threat, we had to phase out CFCs or chlorofluorocarbons. For that, Montreal Protocol was signed. CFCs were replaced with HFCs and HCFCs. But later, we realized that HFCs and HCFCs are greenhouse gases. They have global warming potential. That is why Montreal Protocol was amended through the Kigali Amendment, which is phasing out HFCs as well. Because HFC is a greenhouse gas. Even though it's not depleting ozone, it is a greenhouse gas. So through Kigali Amendment of Montreal Protocol, we are phasing out HFCs as well. But please note, Montreal Protocol is very successful. Because of Montreal Protocol, today ozone hole is repairing. We have phased out CFCs. CFCs are almost eliminated everywhere in the world. And in few years, HFCs will also be removed, which is a greenhouse gas. Okay, so guys, these were the questions and doubts I could see here. So that is it from my end. I hope it was a fruitful discussion. Do let me know in the comments how the session went. Your feedback would be very helpful, much needed as well after a 2-hour session. So do let me know how the class went. I hopefully see you again in either a class or maybe in the next webinar. So till then, please take care. Have a good night. All the best.